Welcome to another episode of Fabitgarage. So this episode is going to be the bonus episode for 4th of July, which is today. I spent the last couple of days just grinding on this thing and doing as much as I could, and I got so much done, more than I've ever done in any weekend. I have a whole list here, what I did. So I did front brakes. I had to take out both front calipers, sandblast them, paint them, make sure they were good. I ran 2 new front brake lines, and then I bled the brakes. For the passenger side brake line, the Miata stock line came down about right there. Obviously, I'm not going to run a brake line down there because the exhaust is so close. So I actually ran it this way here, around the bottom, went into the body with a rubber grommet. So that way, if it does move a little bit, it won't shave on the body. Comes down here. Comes down here. Has that protective sleeve that comes in O2 sensors. Not necessarily for heat, but if your tire is throwing a lot of rocks and stuff, or salt or sand, whatever, I guess it could damage it. So this is just kind of to protect it from the elements. The wheel throwing stuff at it, really. It's like a rubberized fiberglass sleeve. But then over here, it is nice to have the protection from the exhaust. So new brake hoses. So brakes are all done, bled. Pedal feels great. Fuel system done. Here you have my fuel pressure regulator. When I turn the key on, there's also a toggle switch in the car. When I turn the key on, I flip the switch and the pump turns on. But if I turn the ignition off and leave that switch on, it'll shut everything off. So the switch is just an extra step if I want to shut it off and have the key on for something. When I turn the key on, pump comes on. This is exactly at 6 PSI where I want it. Again, high pressure hose and line. This hose is rated for 60 PSI. And everything else is rated for higher. So I did have to install my throttle cable last night because the Miata one wasn't going to work. So I bought a stainless throttle cable which comes out, does a loop, and goes right here. I just made this quick last night because I was in a rush to try and drive this thing to the party. So I made this bracket with 2 little holes here, added 2 springs. So now this is nice, and that's perfect. Ran a couple wires temporarily just so I can drive it, you know what I mean? Added a ground strap temporarily. Again, I'm not gonna leave a ground strap here, but I just needed temporary stuff. The steering is the big thing, and let me show you why. All right, before I show you the steering, I wanna show you the fuel system real quick, which I was just talking about. So this line comes from the pump, goes through a filter, which is this here. From the filter, it hooks up to the factory line with this special fitting and goes to the regulator. From the regulator, it hits 7 PSI. Everything above 7 PSI comes back in this return line here, which is the stainless braided, and goes straight up over the tank and dumps it right back into the tank. So that's my fuel setup. It's out of the way so you can see. So that's that. Now for the steering, look what I have. Oh, look at that, it's a manual rack. So I decided if I'm gonna drive this to the party, I did not have my power steering pump or limes or anything figured out yet. So yeah, I could have turned the wheel with the hydraulic steering, but the only problem is every time you turn the wheel, it spits out fluid that's inside the rack, and I don't want to be driving into, you know, my in-laws driveway leaking ATF all over the place. So, and I don't have the actual pump and line figured out yet what I'm going to use. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to put the manual rack in, which I already had. This is the OEM Miata rack, which is pretty rare. Everybody else got power steering. There's not a lot of cars with the factory manual rack. So again, this is not a power steering that's been depowered. This is factory depowered. So I've actually driven the parts car that came with this rack, and honestly, it's just, I mean, when you're stopped, yeah, it's a little hard, but when you're driving, it really doesn't really make that big of a difference. So I'm gonna run it with this. That way, you know, I'm not leaking fluid. I know the steering is good, and maybe I'll even like it. Maybe it'll give me more race car feel, and I'll just keep it. So I have the other rack right here. The one I modified for this car to carry this oil pan here. So I'm gonna leave this on here for now, and I might end up liking it. If not, then I can just swap them out, and then, you know, once the car is almost done, I can bring the car back in and add power steering to it, if you want to call it like that. So added a ground strap to the starter temporarily. I'm probably gonna put it somewhere else, just so, you know, the starter has good ground to start, along with the ground up there. So make sure when you guys run a ground, you run a nice and beefy ground, because the starter actually needs a really good ground to get a nice start. So let's keep going through the list and see what else I've done. Okay, so fuel system's done, steering's done, paint the bay. So what I did was I took everything out around the engine. I put a blanket over the engine, because from this area here was already black, so all I needed to paint was the top. So I pressure washed the whole bay, let it dry in the sun, and then I covered up the motor and sprayed flat black and put everything back together. So the engine bay is black, as you can see. I think it makes the motor pop out more, and the white that was there was kind of starting to turn yellow and stuff. It didn't really look that good. So now the engine bay is black, so that's done. The clutch was done, but it needed a little bit of an adjustment, because the clutch wasn't fully disengaging, because my paddle wasn't adjusted yet. So basically, when I push in the pedal, my master wasn't going all the way in, because of the adjustment rod that's in there wasn't adjusted yet. So I adjusted that. Now clutch engages and disengages. So that's done. Wired ignition. I already have, all it is one wire on these. So that's wired to when you turn the key on, you get ignition. When you turn it off, it goes away. Wire fuel pump. Basically, I went inside the car. On this car, the fuel pump relay is under the dash, so I basically just bypassed it. And well, I didn't bypass it. I basically added power to, because on these the computer gives the ground. Obviously, I don't have the computer anymore. Well, I have it, but I'm not gonna be running the computer, because I have all the computer wires chopped. So all I did was I gave ignition power to the relay, and I gave it ground through a switch, which is what I was showing you guys there. So that's done. Wire the starter I already did, which is take the Miata harness and hook it up to the starter for the power cable and for the signal wire. So that's done, and I wrapped it in heat protective tape. Now the only two things I gotta do is I gotta torque the axle nuts on the back to the Miata spec, and I gotta tighten the suspension on these. Like I mentioned before, you wanna have the car on the ground when you tighten the suspension, because the controller arms are like this when it's on the left. And if you tighten it like this, then when you put the car on the ground, you're gonna put a lot of stress on the bushing. So you wanna have the control arm like this on its resting position before you tighten it, because once you tighten it there, then the bushing is gonna be set to that angle, and it'll be under stress when it's on the lift, but when it's on the ground, it'll be perfectly fine. So the way you do that is you put probably 3 or 4 pieces of a 2x4, and then you put it under the tire, and then you lower the car. So that way you have enough room to go under there and tighten it. So that's done. Well, no, I'm sorry, that's not done. So I gotta tighten the suspension and torque the axle nut. Hang the exhaust is all hung, but I still have to take it down and fully weld it, but for the purpose of driving it up front, it'll be plenty. So that's done. Throttle cable, I know I wrote gas cable. Throttle cable's done. And the tank vent, I just had to bypass the tank vent so it wouldn't build up pressure, which I already did. And pretty much that's it, guys. I mean, I'm gonna put the headlights on quick, put the bumper on, put the wheels on, torque the wheels, torque the suspension, the axle nut, and then we're gonna do a video of this thing firing it up and hopefully backing out of the shop and driving to the party up front. So very exciting day today, but I think it's looking pretty good. The car is dirty. I'm not gonna bother cleaning or anything, but as of right now, it looks like the engine will run, the car will go into gear, the car will move under its own power. That's a huge achievement for anybody. I mean, I cannot believe I pretty much built a car from scratch in this amount of time, which is amazing. So